Hi there, my friend. I'm Peter Barron, and welcome to today's episode of the Independent School Moonshot Podcast. I am thrilled to be joined by Jill Goodman. Jill is the owner of Goodman Consulting, and Jill and I have known each other for a bunch of years. We've collaborated on a couple of things. She did some stuff inside of Moonshot Lab, which was terrific and actually inspired this conversation today. And we're going to dig into, fundraising, the head's role, all sorts of things. Jill's got tons of experience in this area, and I'm excited to dig into it with her. Before we do that, Jill Goodman, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Peter. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Anytime, my friend. And hey, listen, before we get going, for those who may not be familiar with you and your work, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and Jill Goodman Consulting?
Yes, I'm happy to do that. I've been involved in independent schools, nonprofits for, maybe 25 years, a long time. And in that time, I was a volunteer, a fundraiser, a grant maker. I was an administrator for 10 years in 2 independent schools here in Baltimore, where I'm talking to you from. And I've been consulting for nearly 8 years, amazingly. And within the consulting practice, which I do love, I work with, actually, I should say, I get to work. I have the privilege of working with school leaders on 3 areas mostly: enrollment retention, leadership mentoring, and development, capacity building, and campaign guidance.
Great. And I know we're going to actually kind of get into that capacity building right now, at least from a skills point of view. When we talked, I guess this was maybe a month or so ago, you did some stuff inside of Moonshot Lab. It was one of the things that you emphasized is that critical role that heads play in the development process.
Mm-hmm.
But many may come from the academic side of the house, so they're not necessarily trained in that area, but yet it's such a critical component of the work. Like, let's just think about it this way. Like, if you're a new head sitting in that role, like how would you shift your mindset in order to fully embrace development and make sure that you're successful in that aspect of your job?
Yeah. So I would say the most critical mindset for coming to development as a new head of school is to adopt the mindset of bravery and curiosity. So many people are really fearful about talking about money, kind of who has it, who doesn't, the thought of asking for a gift. It just feels really like it overwhelming or intimidating. But really, there's just so much more to it. Like, the ask is the smallest part of the whole thing. But what's really important is the interaction with donors, meeting them. I mean, the same reason you got the job as head of school is the same reason that donors are going to want to talk to you and be interested in you, because of your enthusiasm, your willingness to take the school in a wonderful direction, your leadership acumen. Those are all the same things that donors are interested in and want to hear. And those invitations to collaborate with your donors on ideas or projects or programs are interesting to both the school and the donor. I mean, that's where the time's really spent. And by the time you get around to asking, that's a pretty small part. It feels really natural, or it makes perfect sense by the time you get there. And so another thing that schools heads need to know is that your most dedicated investors and supporters, they'll want to have a relationship with the head of school and learn about your vision. And so the tendency is to delegate all of that to the development director, but really it's a partnership between the head and the development director. And the head needs to have their own small, intentional portfolio of the most transformational donors that they're continually stewarding and having a relationship with. And that can be surprising for a new head to know that.
That's going to be part of your portfolio of overarching things that related to the school.
Correct.
Yeah. I'm curious, you mentioned a word that I'm really passionate about, which is vision, right? I think when you have a compelling vision, it helps your community understand where are you going. You may not necessarily say, like, have a pathway crafted to the vision, because the vision is aspirational. It could be audacious in some cases. If you don't have that vision, how does that impact the head's ability to fundraise?
Well, your school has a mission, right? And it has a philosophy. So even if you're not clear on the vision, you still have things that are incredible that are happening every day in your
Your
program.
purpose, right?
Yeah, your purpose. And that purpose is fueled by a budget, an annual budget. And there is no reason why donors can't be invited to help fuel your annual budget in an aspect that they are particularly passionate about. I just got a newsletter from a school today, and they had these fabulous poems from middle school students in a little video. And I am thinking to myself, a conversation with a head of school and another donor who gives heavily to the arts. What a perfect alignment, in terms of seeing that and wanting to support something that's already part of your program. It doesn't have to be some big audacious goal. It's what you do and what you're good at and what makes your school fabulous.
One of the things that you had talked about was the directors of development needing a seat at the leadership table and even reporting to the board. Before we dig into that, can you talk a little bit about what makes for a good relationship between a head and a development director? What's involved with cultivating that and building that kind of trust and partnership?
I think the understanding that if you've hired well for a development director and this person has a full complement of skills and understanding and knowledge and motivation and drive, that they need to craft the strategy and let them craft the strategy. Let them be a leader, in the full way of doing that, and let them be creative too. One of the things that sometimes gets in the way of development teams doing everything they can to move the school forward is, this is not going to sound good, but sometimes it's the CFO or the business office who likes to do things in a very specific way. And sometimes you can advance your school in more interesting ways if you're willing to restrict more gifts. And sometimes this relationship that the head has with the CFO can get in the way or not be a smooth circle of communication and allow the development team to have the latitude that they could in terms of making really good connections.
Can you talk about that strategy? I'd love to learn a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's savvy donors who say, here's a gift and use it however way you see fit. And then there are also savvy donors who want to restrict their giving to an area that's important to them that they want to make sure moves forward in a way that makes sense or is in alignment with the vision of the school or could do something really amazing in that space. So they could be restricting their gift within the annual fund or creating something special. And the more restricted gifts you have, the more complicated it is to account for.
Sure, of course.
It doesn't mean it can't fuel your annual fund, but it's more complicated to account for that and it's stickier. And so sometimes there are business officers who don't want to do that, or it's just too complicated. And that can be problematic from a development point of view if your only option is to raise unrestricted giving.
Right. You may not be as compelling of a pitch.
Right. You want to have an alignment with your donor. You want to find out what's really interesting to them about your program.
Yeah. Well, so that's a great segue into why you advocate for development directors having a seat at the leadership tables, especially at that board level. Is that common? Is that not something that happens regularly?
It happens more often than you think, actually, that development will get kind of sidelined by business office. Oh, what are you talking about?
Oh, I was going the other way. So I was saying that it was more common that they actually have a seat at the table, but you're saying...
No, it's equal. Some have great relationships with their board. They should have a great relationship with their board and their head. I love to see development directors report at board meetings every month or however often the board meets, whether it's quarterly or every month. I love to see the development director invited to the board meeting to present themselves to the board. I think it's great for them to have a trusting relationship and be able to answer questions on the spot about what's happening. I think it's important for the development director to have some sort of connections, discovery, stewardship with each board member every year if possible. Some schools have huge boards, so it might not be fully possible, but I would love to see that happen. Yeah, I think sometimes they are not asked to report, mostly because the head is being sensitive to the time constraints of the development director. They don't want them to have to be there on a Tuesday evening or a Saturday morning. But I think that's a worthwhile conversation about the importance of them being there.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what would your advice be to, better integrating a development leader into that board environment?
Yeah, I think just inviting them in and delivering their own report, or giving it in tandem with the development committee chair. I think it's just it's collaboration and trust and respect for the role that they have. Additionally, if the development director is there, he or she can think about projects and ideas that are happening in their infancy. So as things are being discovered or brought up on the board level, the development director can be thinking about how might we finance a project like that. Do we have can I think of 5 donors who would be interested in this project? And then the board has more information to go on in terms of if this is a feasible project or not.
Yeah. As we're stop, that reminds me of something that you had talked about in terms of cultivating larger gifts. And one of the things that you cautioned against was a school chasing the big fish donor.
Yeah.
That, the well-known philanthropist in your community who may not be connected to your school. How can a school, talk to me about that and how schools should be thinking about, that component.
So, I mean, you bring up a term that I use a little bit tongue in cheek. So the idea of the big fish, which is, that's the donor in your town that everyone is chasing. Everybody knows this person. Their name is, on a wing at the hospital and like the art museum and the student center. And the trustee shows up in a meeting, and tells the development director that they should get a meeting with this person and that will solve our problems. And inevitably that will happen. And it's well-meaning, but what it really indicates is the trustees aren't really clear on their role as trustees and how they can be helpful in development. And we're not helping trustees understand their role in terms of how to be helpful. But what you're really looking for is alignment with people. If there are people in the community, your best donors are the people that already know you. And it usually is that we haven't spent enough time talking with them or discovering them or nurturing the relationship with the people who have given you a gift that might have been surprising, but you didn't act on it. You sent them a thank you letter, but you didn't invite them in for a meeting. So that's more the case. There are interesting alignments and you can make these connections. I can share a story about.
Yeah, I love it.
Thought. So when we think about the idea, administrators think, well, trustees should just introduce us to people, and then we'll be able to raise money from them. And trustees are like, well, I can't just give you my contact list. Like, what do you actually want? What do you need? And so, I worked at this school where it's this great thing. There was a trustee who, she had a friend who was a children's book author. And this author, the trustee said the author was kind of between books and she really loved reading to students, but she hadn't done that in a while. And she wondered if she could introduce her friend to the 3rd grade teacher. Maybe she could come and read some books. And so the head of school said, sure, I'll talk to the teacher. The teacher said, sure, we love her books. That would be great. I read them anyway. That would be fabulous. So the woman, the author, came in and she started this routine reading, a few times a year. And it was wonderful. Teachers loved her. She was a very wonderful, gregarious, fabulous woman. And she sometimes she illustrated her books. So she would do art projects with the kids. And it was wonderful. She developed this great friendship, wonderful friendship with the head of school. And it turned out, unbeknownst to the group, because it was kind of a small school, that she was a member of one of the largest philanthropic families in town. And so it ended up that she was kind of a big fish. And because the alignment was genuine and there was a real need on the part of the author to be there, and the relationship that she found with the school and the school leaders. She wanted to see that school advance. So she was the lead donor for the library renovation. She was an annual fund donor every year. She supported all of the events because she wanted to be there. She wanted to make sure that this happened. And so that it's a story of a true alignment, in terms of when development asks the trustee, well, can you give us context? What does that mean? How can we form something that makes sense?
Yeah, where does how does that piece, like, how does a piece of your mission align with, that potential quote unquote big fish?
Right.
Yeah, I love
And
that.
if you're not always thinking about the money, sometimes the money will come because it makes sense.
Right. Yeah, totally. And you've built a relationship over time that includes trust, value alignment, all of these
Mhm.
different things. All that said, you had mentioned it earlier on in the episode around how asking for money can be uncomfortable. And, I don't know if it's the fear of the no, if it's the fear of who knows what it could be, right? There are lots of different psychological barriers, I imagine. Um, so my question to you is, how do you overcome that? Like,
Yeah.
how do you get over that hurdle?
I mean, the two barriers are probably fear and inexperience, right?
Mm.
So I work with heads of school. I work with development directors. I work with trustees to mentor them, to teach them how to do this, the art and science of all of the different parts of the donor journey that they might take with a leadership donor. And when we work here, I dispel myths, right? I focus on the realities, particularly when I work with trustees. There's often this big disconnect that I mentioned between the administrative team and what they think trustees should be doing, and then what trustees actually know how to do and what they can do for you. There's often this big disconnect. So some possible myths could be this myth of the big fish. There's the myth that all trustees have to ask for major gifts and open their contact list to the development team. That's a myth. And also a huge myth is the one that events are the best way to advance the school.
Right.
And some of the realities are that there are lots of ways for trustees to help, and it's more of what your school needs and what your development director has the bandwidth to project manage trustees in their role in helping you. And also a reality is that all trustees need to give a gift to the school that is personally meaningful to their family. And that should be clear and upfront in the beginning of any trustee's term as
Hmm.
a trustee.
If you're ahead though, and you're new to this, and you said maybe there's inexperience there, or there's fear. Like, what are
Mhm.
what's one piece of advice you would offer ahead in that situation?
I think it's knowing that you don't need to ask for something right away.
Mm.
Because if you're coming into a meeting with someone that you know has given a large gift to the school, and there are many steps to that before you get to the point of asking.
Yeah.
And the mistake or the belief is that you need to rush into this meeting and ask them for some large gift, and you need to just sort of expel all of this information about your school and you're going to sell them on something.
Yeah.
That's probably not, that's not going to work out that well.
So I guess what I'm hearing is, one of the best things you can do to overcome the fear is to understand the life cycle of the process.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. That's great advice. A couple more things as we begin to wrap up. So one cautionary note that you put out there is that schools should not look at donors as like an ATM for budget shortfalls. Talk about that. I'd love to dig into it.
Yes. So there's only a few ways there's only a few levers that school leaders have to pull in order to balance a school budget, right? There's tuition, there's development dollars, there might be an endowment draw, there's auxiliary programs. There's just not that many choices, right? And the thing that's most likely to take an unexpected dive is enrollment. in some place or another. And the knee-jerk reaction is to increase the amount of money that development is supposed to raise in order to combat the shortfall. And there's a number of reasons why that won't work, and the things that will go wrong when that happens. But the first thing that I would encourage is to find out what is the problem that's caused the shortfall. And there's always a lot of, we're talking about attrition. There's always a lot of explaining away of the reasons for the attrition. Well, that family's complaining all the time anyway, or it's just a few students and it's an anomaly, or it's, so, and then every year until it becomes sort of a critical problem.
Right.
And to just tell the development team that they need to raise 20% more money in 1 year, it's not realistic, and you'll probably burn your team out. They'll leave, and then you'll have another problem, which is your development team is quitting. And
you're going to have attrition on the other side, right?
Yeah. And you will be able to sustain or steward the relationships with your donors that your development team should be doing. Should have been doing. So it's a cascading sort of effect. And the way to really empower your development team to do the best work they can is to really look at why some piece of your budget is suffering, and not just assume that development will take care of it.
We'll put the Band-Aid on it, right?
Right.
Yeah, I love that advice. I mean, it's what I always offer to schools. There's always symptoms of problems,
Mm-hmm.
and it's almost instinctive and natural to try to treat those symptoms. But it's the real growth happens when you look deeper and try to understand what is the actual disease that you got to diagnose the disease so that you can treat it at the root level versus putting a Band-Aid on something that may only provide relief for a very short period of time.
Right. And that's true. Also, it's not super compelling to donors to just come in and save something that you weren't able to anticipate or remedy in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Last question as we wrap up here. So let's just throw a scenario out there. Let's say a head of school, relatively new, calls you and says, "Oh my gosh, I didn't realize how big a part of my portfolio development is. Like, I'm trying to get my head around how to approach it." I guess at a very high level, 30,000, 40,000 feet, what advice would you offer on that call?
Well, first I would ask a lot of questions. That's always my first thought is I want to know what's happening now, the program they inherited, what their goals are. I want to know where they're headed with the school. Who are the people in place that they have working with? How do they feel about those people? How have they been performing? Kind of what brought the school to this point, and what are their worries? And then I can start to think about how to help.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is you gotta get to the root cause first, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. That's great. Jill Goodman of Jill Goodman Consulting. If somebody wants to reach out to you, what is the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, you can come through my website. By all means, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn and on Instagram. Yeah.
Awesome. That's terrific. Jill, I appreciate you sharing knowledge, and this is terrific. I really do appreciate the time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Peter. It's always wonderful to talk with you.